Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be drawing Horsey, the 116th, I believe, Pokemon. Let me see if I'm correct. Yep, I was right. 116th. Going to be using Procreate as always on my iPad Pro from 2023. It has an M2 chip, so yeah, and then of course Apple Pencil. I have a little grip on it from the Paperlike, the gray one. Yeah, and then I'm gonna be coloring it using digital color pencils. So it should be pretty good. I think I'm starting to settle more into like color pencils as my preferred method of coloring. Even though I do use digital paint a little bit here and there, for the most part, I mostly use colored pencils now, just because I like the saturation it has and how it feels when I'm coloring. But a little bit about Horsey. Horsey, if attacked even by a large enemy, Horsey effortlessly swims to safety by utilizing. I'm saying this so wrong for some reason. Utilizing. Yeah, utilizing its well-developed dorsal fin. Dorsal fin being the little fin you see in the back, if you don't know. Maybe it's the one on the bottom. No, that's the tail. Yeah, no. Anyways, height is about 1'4". Weight about 17 pounds. Pretty good weight. Category is a dragon. And of course, it's a water type. Weaknesses include grass and electric. Yeah, so a little bit about Horsey. So yeah. So enjoy the drawing. Today I'm gonna be ranting a little bit about let's see. Looking at my list of things, making amends with the past. Well, whenever I make these videos, if you don't know, I usually talk about my own personal experience with these type of subjects, because I think that for me to try to make it seem like, or try to get into the trying to think of what I want to say here. Yeah, so I'm gonna be talking about my own experience with making amends with my past, which I haven't fully done. You know, I try to do it a little bit every day, but it's something that is difficult. At least for me, it is. You know, and so I guess the way that I'll start this in terms of making amends with the past is with a lot of mistakes that I've made in my life. You know, of course, I don't fully understand all the mistakes I've made, but I try to the best of my ability. And I think trying to understand your mistakes is better than pretending that they don't exist, because we tend to have a bias about ourselves that we are better people than we are. And it's not to say that you have to be hard on yourself, or you have to be like not self-indulgent. What's the opposite of self-indulgent? Not self-aggrandizing. That's also bigging up yourself. I'm trying to think of the word. Deprecating. That's the word I'm looking for. So self-deprecating. You don't have to be self-deprecating in terms of. Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by. Sorry if you heard that. But yeah, so you don't have to be self-deprecating when it comes to making amends with your past. Like, you don't, when it comes to acknowledging what your mistakes are, and I think I've talked about this before, but I'll expand on it a little more here. When it comes, for me at least, when it comes to making amends with my past and taking accountability for my actions and anything that I do, no matter what it is, I used to, and I still somewhat do this, but it's less so now that I'm aware of this. But I used to for sure be way more harsh on myself, and I used to be very self-deprecating. So I would tell myself that things like I'm not good enough, I'm not this, I'm not that, you know, it, it's just in my nature. And I had to realize that a lot of these things that I didn't like that I was doing, that I have the ability to change it. And it's a very simple concept. Trust me, it sounds like very simple, very obvious to a lot of people. But for me, it wasn't. And maybe it was like in my head, it was easy for me to be like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But in terms of putting it into practical practice into my life, it wasn't something that it wasn't something that was easy for me to do. And I had to figure out what that line is between holding myself accountable and making sure that I'm not being self-deprecating though. Because it's a thin line between the two. At least for me it was. Because at first, like for example, like if I were to lie, right? If I were to tell a lie and say, that I didn't do something when I did, me saying that to somebody, it's first of all, of course, it's not good, obviously. But another thing is that for me, once you start lying out loud, because they say that the words that are spoken from your mouth have power, and whatever you say, a lot of it tends to come to fruition. And to a certain extent, I agree with it, because I do believe in, making sure that you're positive with yourself and making sure that you aren't being so harsh on yourself. Where was I going with this? Forgive me. I was going somewhere with this. Okay, so sorry, I'm gonna recount what I said. So if I lie, yeah. So words spoken from the mouth are very powerful. So if I lie, say something that I did or didn't do something, and I did, then it starts becoming reality. Like it starts to become something that actually starts to happen, even if you don't necessarily realize it. At least for me, it started happening where I started to so with me lying, right, I started to tell myself that I was a liar and that I wasn't good enough, and that I don't what's the word? I don't know why I can't think of the word. It's a very simple word. I know it's a simple word. Oh, that's the word. Deserve. I don't know why I couldn't think of it. Yeah. So I didn't deserve to be happy or anything like that. And I don't know why I thought these things at the moment. And even still to this day, I don't necessarily know exactly why. But I do know that it's not something that I should be thinking. It's not something that I should put any weight behind. Because it's not true. I believe that, some people don't believe this, but I believe that everybody deserves to be happy in life. No matter what you did, no matter how bad, quote unquote bad of a person you are, I believe that we all deserve happiness. And that comes in different forms, Even this is going to be kind of controversial what I'm about to say, but I do believe this. I believe that even like somebody like a R. Kelly or a P. Diddy, that are in jail, or Bill Cosby, people that have done horrific stuff, terrible stuff. I can acknowledge that these people have done terrible things. And a lot of people will say that they are bad people. And that's up to you if you want to put that label on them. But what I realize is that once you label somebody something, a lot of times their behavior will match whatever you think about them. So for instance, if I think that somebody is a good person, right? Whatever you define a good person as, then that person will ascribe subconsciously, by the way, will end up thinking that person, no matter what they do, is a good person. And we start having this bias, these blinders of that person being a quote unquote good person. When, in actuality, if we're being very honest about humans and us as a species, and I say this, I don't know why I'm calling us a species like that, but you get what I'm saying. Us as a human race, us as like I said, as a species, we are not one or the other. A lot of times we tend to go back and forth between the two at different times throughout the day. At one point we have a quote unquote good action, and at other points we have a quote unquote bad action. Like, there are people that cut people off in traffic, there are people that drive however they drive, and they are doing a quote unquote a bad action. Does that make them a bad driver? Possibly. Does it make them a bad person? Possibly. Maybe they don't care about anybody else. But to label them as wholly or solely, not wholly, maybe wholly and solely, I don't know, wholly solely. But to label that person as only a good or bad person is, to me, I think it's not, I'm not gonna say it's not right, but it's just not I don't think it's conducive to like a good mental state, because it becomes you get to a point, at least for me, I used to subscribe people as good and bad, until I'm like, no, we're just humans, we fluctuate between. There are people that do more harm than good, or people that do more good than harm, but overall we're just human, and hopefully, I'm hoping that most of us are conscious enough or aware enough of ourselves, self-aware enough to try to want to do more good than harm in our lifetime, and I think that's the ultimate goal as a human being, to try to do more good than harm, because I think if we're able to do that, the world will be just a slightly better place, and that'll be a great thing, I think. But yeah, let me see exactly what I was. So what I mean by making amends with the past is just that with all my past behavior, I would one thing that I told myself as an individual is that I thought that I was a bad person. I don't know if you ever heard the song "You" by Kendrick Lamar, just the letter U by Kendrick Lamar. It's on his To Pimp a Butterfly album, and I talked about this before, but that song resonates with me a lot, and it's because in it he talks about himself and everything he blames himself for, and he talks about loving himself is complicated. He says in the song loving you is complicated, but he's talking to himself in the third person, so he's saying that loving himself is complicated. And it's a great song, it honestly, like, the more I listen to it, the more I pull from it in my own life, because I thought, I blame myself for a lot of stuff that happened in my life, and it was becoming self-deprecating, and it was coming to a point where I was not in a good mental state, until I started to do some healing, and started to realize that because I'm human, I am going to make mistakes. However, I shouldn't use me being human as an excuse she'd be like, okay, I made this mistake. I need to try to fix whatever this is, whatever the mistake is. Sometimes fixing a mistake is honestly just letting it be, forgiving yourself for it and just moving on with your life. But sometimes you have to apologize to somebody or, do something outside of yourself, do some work outside of yourself. And that's okay too, I got to do some of that myself with apologizing to people. I haven't done it because I really don't, I don't know. I just don't really feel like it at the moment. If I'm being honest, I don't feel like doing it right now. I don't feel like apologizing to anybody at the moment. Even though I've forgiven myself for whatever the situation was between me and the other person, I think I've healed from it. But in order to get, I think, proper healing on both sides, I think I have to apologize at some point. But right now, I'm not going to do it at the moment because, But one day I hope to, be able to get to a point where I'm able to make amends for whatever mistakes I've made with other people and all that. But if not, I think I'll be okay in terms of like accepting that, it's okay if you don't even talk to that person anymore or whatever it may be. Because you may think that, like for me, right, I think that person did wrong as well. And it's not just one specific person, it's multiple people. But I think these people that I'm talking about in general, that they did wrong. But I also know I did wrong. And that's the thing, is that once you realize that you've done wrong, that's like one of the hardest steps. It's just like Alcoholics Anonymous. Like one of the very first step to any issue, no matter what it is admitting where you messed up at, or where the issue is, or that you have a problem, whatever the problem is. And that's what I've done. I've been able to acknowledge that I have the issue and to take steps to try to heal that issue. And for other people, they may not be able to do so. They may not think they did anything wrong. And that's fine too. One thing I'm not gonna do in general in life is to tell somebody that, well, I take that back. I will tell somebody that they're wrong. I have no problem with that. But what I'm not gonna do is force them to change and force them to acknowledge that they did wrong. Like, I'll just acknowledge it. Hey, this is where I think, this was wrong. And if they just say, okay, so, or no, I don't think I did wrong, cool, I'll drop it. I'm not going to keep repeating myself and try to make it to where I have to convince them that they have a problem. I'll just state what it is and leave it be, And maybe that's what the other people that I'm talking about, maybe that's what they did or are doing, And I think it's hard to get outside ourselves sometimes, and to get outside of our own minds, because obviously we live in our minds. So, like, how can you get outside of your mind, Like, how can you try to understand another person's perspective when you don't have their experiences and all that? Yeah, but I think I'll leave it at that for now. I'll just kind of let the rest of this drawing play out. But yeah, just make amends with your past. I think that's the best thing you can do. Whether that be forgiving yourself, forgiving somebody else, make amends with it, and forgive yourself. Try not to be self-deprecating in the process. But if you are, give yourself some grace. I think that's the biggest thing. But yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll talk to y'all on the next one.